If I had a dime for every time I had a parent tell me that their kid doesn't lie to them, I would be a very, very rich man. Now remember, I've been in education for 26 years. I've been a principal of elementary, middle, and secondary school. So I've dealt with a lot of parents and I've had to call home a lot of times. And I can tell you, parents tell me constantly that their kid would never lie to them. Welcome back to this Saturday's Walk and Talk, where I'm going to talk about lying. So the question to ask is, why do kids lie? And it's usually because of something deeper. And the problem is we jump into this place of our kids lying is a bad thing and that they should be punished for lying. Because let's face it, lying is not something that depicts good character. However, there's a reason for lying. Kids are lying because they're too afraid to tell the truth. So why is that? Now, my intention here isn't to shame anyone, because I'm a parent and my kids have lied to me. And I've also been that parent who said that, no, my kid's not lying in a certain situation when there have been. And, I've been stuck sometimes with video evidence of them doing the thing that they said they didn't do. God, thank God we grew up with no video evidence, hey? The hard part about watching this video is letting that whole notion of your kids being able to tell a lie or lying to other people, to you, to their teachers, to their principal, to their friends. It's something that we don't want to hear. It's a hard pill to swallow, because we all think that we're raising our kids with that character that they're not going to tell lies. But they do. And they tell lies because there's something stopping them from telling the truth. When we think to ourselves, why are they lying? What are they hiding? They know better. My kids can trust me. There's no reason for them to lie. Most of the time, though, they're lying because there's something going on that's deeper. And it's quite an easy fix, actually. And it's something that you can retrain and recondition in your household, but it takes some work on your part as well as your kids' part to get there. And I'm going to talk about that today. Our kids get to telling lies so quickly, too. And a lot of it comes from our initial reaction as an adult. It's, our first question is when our kids do something wrong or they make a mistake with their behavior, it's, why did you do that? How could you do that? What were you thinking? You know better. Phrases like that. And we say things because we're emotional in the situation and we're not regulated ourselves. And when we do that, right away, our kids' nervous systems tighten up. Their amygdala steps in because they feel a threat. Regardless if they love you and you're kind and you're caring and they should trust you, your kid's nervous system is going to react. And like I've talked about many, many times, your amygdala is that part of your brain that goes into fight, flight, and freeze response, right? And so the moment your kids feel like they get defensive, anyone for that matter, you're an adult, I'm an adult, and we get defensive right quick. And what happens in your body when you get defensive is your amygdala goes into that fight mode. Right? It goes into that mode where it's, I need to protect myself. I'm going to do anything to get out of this. And for kids, when they get into that situation where their nervous system takes over because they feel threatened, and yes, you're speaking calmly and you're not doing anything that's threatening, but the questions themselves are threatening because they worry about disappointment, they worry about shame, they worry about all those things. And then as soon as that happens, it's not about how do I fix this? It's about how do I get out of this? And that's where the lie is born. For kids and for adults too, for that matter, the first thing that comes into play is, how do I get out of this? How do I make this not hurt? How do I take away the shame? How do I take away that feeling of disappointing the adult in my life? How do I not feel like I've done something wrong and I can't fix it? And the only way to get out of this is to appease the person that's in front of me. And the quickest way to do that is to tell a white lie or a big lie or to blame somebody else. Kids are really good at blaming other kids when they're in trouble for things at school. Or siblings. I look at, God, Cruz and Evie, I don't know how many times one of them would do something wrong and the first thing they do is you got two fingers pointing in the opposite direction. Evie pointing at Cruz, Cruz pointing at Evie, and it's like, oh, okay. And so that's what kids do. And adults do the same thing. We're not innocent from this. So when we talk about lying, and we are specifically talking about kids because my walk and talks are for parents and to help you, raise mentally strong kids. Use this to reflect on your own behavior as well, because we do lie when we feel threatened. And our reaction makes our kids feel like they're going to disappoint us, and we make them feel shame. So we're part of the problem. So you're probably thinking, okay, Slansy, what's the solution? Well, I can tell you, the solution is actually easier than you think. And in my previous walk and talks, I've talked a lot about discomfort. I've talked a lot about our amygdala, like I have here, where when we feel threatened, we go into that fight, flight, and freeze mode. And what we have to do is we have to get to a place where when we're dealing with kids and their behavior, we have to get to a place where they understand that when they make mistakes with behavior, it doesn't mean we're judging their character. And, in every school I've worked at, I've taken a lot of pride as a principal getting to that place where, when kids come to my office, I make them feel safe enough, or I try to make them feel safe enough. And I tell them straight up, listen, hey, I love you. And yes, there's a lot of kids. I say I love you a lot to kids. It's kind of awkward when you say it to a 17-year-old teenage boy who's really rough and tumble. But, those 17-year-old boys, 18-year-old boys, they give me the biggest hugs on that grad stage when they get to that point too, because they appreciate it. And the important piece as parents is we have to realize that behavior isn't character. So when we come at the kids with questions when they do something wrong that make it feel like it's about character, it's like when we use the word, this is a good one. When when we call a kid a bad kid, or that's bad, or you're good, or you're a good kid, when we use phrases like good and bad, like that was a bad choice, that was a good choice. We have to separate those words out of the equation, because bad inherently brings shame. It brings disappointment. It brings embarrassment, right? So we want to get that out of our kids' system. And the only way to do that is we need to shift, bad and good to right and wrong. What right and wrong does is it allows us to separate the behavioral mistake from character, right? So when we have a kid who's done the wrong thing, like at our school, we use something called the mindfulness map, which is going to flash up on the screen here. And that mindfulness map is filled with questions. They're closed-ended questions that a kid can answer quickly. And the first question on that mindfulness map is, did you do the right or the wrong thing? Right? And right away, a kid, once they get used to hearing that, they're not hearing, did you do a bad or a good thing? And they can answer, this is pretty cool. And right away, a kid can say, I did the wrong thing. As soon as they say they did the wrong thing, they're talking about the behavior and they're separating it from their personality, because kids are inherently good. 26 years in this field, and I've probably maybe met 5 or 6 kids who are just bad to the core. They're going to be on those crime documentaries one day. But you got to think, in 26 years, that's thousands of kids. I'm talking thousands. That's why when I run into you guys and I can recognize your face and I can't recognize your name, or I recognize your name and not your face because you got too old, there's that many kids. And I can tell you, 99% of kids are good kids. And so when you're able to separate that behavior from personality, it takes the pressure off. So you can imagine when you separate the behavior from character, how quickly a kid will trust the fact that they're going to be able to fix what they did wrong, and they'll move away from lying. Now, it doesn't happen overnight, because trust, like anybody knows, trust takes a long time to build. But after it's done repeatedly, kids eventually start to trust the fact that, hey, he's just looking at my mistake, which I get a fix. And he's not judging me. He still loves me. He still gave me a hug, sent me back to class. My teacher still cares about me. My parents still care about me. I just made a mistake. And I wish I could talk about individual kids. I mean, I can talk about kids from my school, but I wish I could name names, because there's some kids at my school, that I've had. You gotta think, I've been in, 3 elementary schools, 2 elementary schools. I don't even remember. I've had a good 8 or 9 years where I've had kids that I meet when they're 5 years old in kindergarten. And it's so amazing to watch them learn how to tell the truth by the time they go from kindergarten to grade 1 to grade 2, because they learn that doing the wrong thing isn't a judgment on who they are. And there's some kids at my school I'm so proud of, who've now gone from, when they were in grade 2, it was lie after lie after lie. And now in grade 4, they're so honest and they're so truthful because they know they get to fix their mistake. I'm so proud of them. So proud of them. So here's the strategy. The first thing that we want to do is we want to regulate our kids' nervous system. So if we're in that situation where a kid makes a mistake with their behavior, because like I said earlier, our first reaction is to ask accusatory questions, which feel like we're attacking their personality. But if the first thing we do is we regulate the emotion, regardless, like I think in high school, a kid telling a teacher to fuck off, the first reaction is almost instantly emotion from the principal involved, the teacher involved, the other kids involved, because it's intense, it's anger. But the last thing we do is we jump to repair or we jump to accusations, right? Because in that moment when a kid is telling you to fuck off, what they're doing is they're telling you they're in fight mode. That's their amygdala. So the first thing we want to do, and that's a high school example, and in elementary school, like kids do the same thing, and they're going to go right into that shutting down where they might put their head down on their desk. They might get mad, they might kick, they might even spit on you. They might say something to you. They'll say no. Kindergarten kids, they say no all the time. But the first thing we need to do is we need to regulate. So we need to get them to take deep breaths like we talked about. I think that was 2 videos ago. We take deep breaths. We soothe their amygdala so their reasoning part of their brain can get in charge of their thinking, right? And that's their prefrontal cortex. We want that prefrontal cortex back online so that we can think and reason. And at that point, we move into the next part of dealing with kids, is that's where we get to reflect. And that's where we get to ask that question. It's like, hey, did you do the right or the wrong thing? We want to get to the point where a kid will say, I did the wrong thing. Depending where you're at when you're dealing with your kids around using right and wrong, you have to be very careful. Because again, if you start asking questions when you're in that reflecting stage, getting them to reflect on their behavior, you can send them right back into fight, flight, and freeze mode. So you have to be very careful. So what I like to do at our schools is when I'm first starting with kids who lie a little bit more than the rest of the kids, when I ask them, depends on the severity of it. If the behavior is kind of minor, I'll ask them, did you do the right or the wrong thing? And they'll say the wrong thing. I won't even ask another question. I will go to, okay, how can you fix this? And 9 times out of 10, a kid is going to say, I'm going to go say sorry to Miss Chris, or I'm going to go say sorry to Miss Sue, or I'm going to go say sorry to Mr. Leroy or Mr. Weewoy, and I let them get to the repair piece right away, right? So we do this whole regulate, reflect, and repair thing. And as your kids get comfortable knowing that when they admit they've done the wrong thing and you don't grill them about it, and you let them get to the place where they get to go fix it, because it takes a lot of courage, it takes a ton of courage to go and fix a mistake that you've made. Going to apologize to an adult or going to apologize to a classmate is really hard because your pride takes a hit, right? And this is where your ego comes into play, because your ego doesn't want you to admit that mistake, right? But when you get to a place with your kids, whether it's at home or at school, where your kids understand mistakes and fixing mistakes lead to growth, then you're in a great place. And so eventually what will happen is when I have those kids, when I have these kids now, I can say to a kid, once we've regulated, and this is how it works for me and even with my own kids, a lot of times I'd have to get them to soothe, get them to calm down. And every kid needs to soothe and regulate in their own way, right? But you have a little toolbox that you kind of use once you get to know kids. And you get to that place where you need to reflect. Once they've gone through it a few times and they trust that you're not going to make them feel shame or guilt or embarrassment, that's when you get to that place where you can get into it. You can say, okay, tell me what happened. What led up to it? And then you even ask, were your emotions in charge or were your thinking in charge? Which is, again, on the mindfulness map, right? Because we want our kids to also understand that when they do the wrong thing, 9 times out of 10, it's because their emotions got the best of them. Same with us adults. We do the wrong thing because our emotions get the best of us. And eventually what you're going to see is you're going to see these kids who are going to start explaining and understanding what they did wrong and reflecting it. And that's where the growth happens, right? Because now they're reflecting. Now their prefrontal cortex, their reasoning and thinking brain is at it, right? And when you see this is why I'm so proud of my kids. When you watch a kindergarten kid do that, it's like, wow, this is freaking great. And can you imagine what they're going to be like as teenagers? They're going to have that capability to get through it. Although I'd be remiss to say teenagers' brain gets it gets dumb. It just does. And you know, there's a lot to compete with when it comes to teenagers, even though you put it in there, because they're going to want to do more than we wish they would do, because that's how teenagers work. We were all teenagers once. But the wonderful thing about using that right and wrong context instead of bad and good is it allows us to get to that place of fixing it. It doesn't mean behavior's perfect. It does not mean that. But what it means is that there's a reflection that's based on behavior and not on judgment. And that's huge. And once you get to a place where you've done, you know, the regulation, you've done the reflection, and you get to the repair place, like I said before, that takes a lot of bravery. And that's a big part of our emotional schools framework, is we have this brown poster with a Sasquatch on it. And it's about being bold, and it's about being brave. I'll let it flare up here on the screen for you to see it. But this is where the action happens. And I think, you know, I had an incident at school, and again, I'm not going to name any names, but I had a couple girls who were in the older grades, and they tried to avoid some things because, you know, they didn't want to be out in the cold and whatnot. And so they had to regulate, they had to reflect. And the reparations that they decided to do is that, you know what, they thought, okay, hey, you know what, I can help out in the grade 1 class, or I can go and help Penny in the kitchen. And so one of the things that this particular kid wanted to do was I'm going to do the dishes. And so I had a situation with another kid who was a lot younger, in grade 1 or 2. And we got to the repair place. So we got to the repair place, and guess what? That little guy in grade 2 ended up jumping in with the kid in the intermediate classes, and they went and did dishes together for a whole week. And you know, the best part about that was not that it was just that there was a consequence and the kid was held accountable, because that's big, but there's also giving back to the community, and the pride that came from the young lady who was in the intermediate class, teaching that little guy, that little 7-year-old, how to do dishes. Like, when I talk dishes, I'm talking restaurant style dishwashers, right? So these kids are learning a skill where they can go work at a restaurant and do dishes and do all those things. You know, so it's really cool when you get to that place. You know, so the wonderful thing, and this is going to sound crazy, the wonderful thing about kids who lie is it gives you an opportunity. And so I want you to see it like this. So if you're, you know, a teacher watching this, or a principal watching this, or a parent watching this, probably more parents than educators watching this, but when a kid lies to you the next time, I want you to see it as an opportunity to flip the script. I want you to see it as an opportunity to talk about doing right and doing wrong, which the world needs more than ever right now, because it seems like the adults in this world keep doing the wrong thing over and over again. And so we get to a place when we start teaching about right and wrong, where kids start to take ownership of their behavior. And it's such a beautiful thing. I tell you, it's such a beautiful thing. And I'm so proud of how it works in our school, and so many other schools as well who use that approach. But here's the big but. The most important piece is, as parents and educators, people who work with kids, is we have to be very careful of how we're addressing situations. And it comes down to the words we use a lot of times, because the moment we instill shame or fear or embarrassment, the first instinct, again, is protection. I'm going to protect myself, and the quickest way to protect myself and get out of this situation is to tell a lie. And we don't want that, because kids learn best when they make mistakes. So think about that. As you move forward, it's not too late. It's not too late with your teenagers. It's not too late with your little ones. It's not too late to get started on changing your vocabulary from good and bad to right and wrong. So at the end of the day, when you do get a phone call from your school, or you run into a situation with your own kid where you feel like they're lying, that's when you need to kind of stop and think, okay, is my kid lying? And if so, why are they lying? And they're lying because they feel like they can't be trusted to fix a mistake. So when you get that call, the first thing out of your mouth should never be, my kid never lies. Because here's what I can tell you. A kid's perception sometimes at school is accurate. I tell parents this all the time when I'm on the phone with them. It's like, yes, that's your kid's perception, because their perception of the event that happened is based on feelings, and they're not seeing the 10 other things that happened prior to and after and during the event. And so, yes, their perception might be very real to them. So when they come home and tell you about their perception, it's the truth. They're speaking the truth sometimes. right? And that's, so it's easy for us as parents, because our heart gets all big and we want to protect our kids from discomfort. We jump into that place of, okay, my kid must not be lying. Okay, and plus when you hear the word lying as parents, your kid lied, we feel like it's a judgment on us. We feel like it's a judgment of our own character. And we have to get past that, because it's one of those words that's been used forever. So when you do hear those words, and teachers maybe use the word, your kid's been dishonest, they did the wrong thing and they jumped to a lie. So it's all in phrasing and how we talk to each other, because it's so easy to make people defensive. You know, and it's one of the things that I try to help new teachers with when they make that first phone call home, is the last thing you want to do is start off a conversation by making a parent defensive, because it'll be mama bear protecting her cub, regardless of what their kid did, right? And same thing with parents. You know, when your kid comes home with an issue from school, don't call the school and start raising hell right away, because right off the bat, you're going to make a teacher defensive, whether they get paid for it or not, right? You want to have a conversation, because ultimately what you want is you want your kid to do the right thing. And so that relationship between home and school around this is super important too. So at the end of the day, this isn't about lying. This is about kids feeling like, and adults feeling like, they can be trusted to tell the truth and trusted with the responsibility of fixing their mistake. So again, it comes back to fixing mistakes. And on that note, everyone, peace out.